Sometimes the most extraordinary warriors come in the most unexpected packages. What happens when a military base full of hardened soldiers discovers that their assumptions about strength, skill, and courage might be completely wrong? This is the true story of how one 8-year-old girl with steady hands and an unbreakable spirit turned an entire army base upside down, proving that heroes don't always wear adult-sized boots. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on forward operating base Apache, casting long shadows across the training grounds where Sergeant Marcus Thompson wiped sweat from his forehead. The Arizona heat was nothing new to the seasoned soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division, but today felt different. Word had spread through the barracks like wildfire that morning they were getting visitors. Not the usual brass or politicians looking for photo opportunities, but something much more unusual. A family was coming to the base. The daughter of Staff Sergeant David Chen, who had been killed in action 6 months earlier in Afghanistan, was being honored in a special ceremony. The little girl, along with her mother, would spend the day at the base where her father had trained before his final deployment. It was meant to be a gesture of respect, a way to show the family that their sacrifice hadn't been forgotten. Marcus had served alongside David Chen for 3 years. The man had been a legend with a rifle, one of the best marksmen the base had ever seen. His death had hit everyone hard, but the thought of meeting his 8-year-old daughter filled Marcus with an uncomfortable mixture of sadness and curiosity. What do you say to a child who has lost everything? The morning air was crisp as the black sedan pulled through the base gates. Inside sat Sarah Chen, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a miniature set of camouflage fatigues that had been specially tailored for the occasion. Her mother, Linda Chen, sat beside her, fighting back tears as she watched her daughter stare out the window at the sprawling military installation. Sarah's small hands gripped a worn photograph of her father in his dress uniform. She had carried it everywhere since the funeral, and today was no different. The 8-year-old had insisted on wearing the camouflage outfit, saying she wanted to honor her daddy by dressing like a soldier. The base commander had approved the request, thinking it would be a touching tribute. As the car approached the main administrative building, groups of soldiers stopped their morning routines to watch. Some whispered among themselves, others simply observed in respectful silence. The sight of the small figure in miniature military gear was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Martinez stepped forward as the car came to a stop. She had been David Chen's commanding officer and had volunteered to personally oversee the day's events. The colonel was known for her no-nonsense approach to military life, but those who served under her respected her deeply. She understood the importance of this visit, not just for the family, but for the entire base. "Welcome to Forward Operating Base Apache," Colonel Martinez said gently as Sarah and her mother emerged from the vehicle. The little girl stood at attention, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing military buildings around her. Despite her size, there was something unmistakably serious in her posture, something that reminded several observers of her father. Sarah's mother knelt down beside her daughter, adjusting the small camouflage cap that sat slightly too large on the child's head. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart," Linda whispered. "Daddy would be so proud to see you here." The 8-year-old nodded solemnly, then looked up at Colonel Martinez with eyes that seemed far too mature for her age. "Thank you for having us, ma'am," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. "My daddy always said this was the best base in the army." Several nearby soldiers exchanged glances, surprised by the child's composure. Most kids her age would have been overwhelmed by the military environment, but Sarah seemed to take everything in stride. There was a quiet confidence about her that was remarkable for someone so young. The planned itinerary for the day included a tour of the base facilities, a visit to the memorial wall where David Chen's name was permanently inscribed, and a presentation ceremony where Sarah would receive her father's posthumous medals. What nobody expected was how the day would ultimately unfold. As the group began their tour, starting with the administrative offices and moving toward the training facilities, Sarah asked questions that surprised the adults around her. She wanted to know about the different types of weapons her father had used, the training exercises he had participated in, and the specific skills that had made him such an exceptional soldier. Sergeant Thompson found himself walking alongside the small group, drawn in by Sarah's unexpected curiosity about military life. When she asked about marksmanship training, her eyes lit up with genuine interest. "Daddy taught me about shooting," she said matter-of-factly. "He said it was important to learn how to be safe around guns and how to respect them." The statement caught several soldiers off guard. In their experience, most civilian children knew little about firearms, let alone proper safety protocols. But Sarah spoke about weapons with a knowledge that suggested significant exposure to military culture through her father. As they approached the main training complex, the sounds of various exercises filled the air. Soldiers were conducting physical fitness drills, weapons maintenance, and tactical simulations. The organized chaos of military training was in full swing, and Sarah watched everything with fascination. At the rifle range, a group of soldiers were conducting marksmanship practice. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the desert landscape as marksmen worked to improve their accuracy at various distances. Sarah stopped walking and listened intently to the rhythmic sound of the shooting exercises. "Can we watch the shooting practice?" she asked Colonel Martinez, her voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. The request seemed innocent enough, and the colonel agreed, thinking it would be educational for the child to see the kind of training her father had excelled at. The rifle range was an impressive facility, with multiple firing lanes extending out to targets at 100, 300, and 500-meter distances. Safety protocols were strictly enforced, with designated observation areas for non-participants. Sarah and her mother were positioned behind the safety line, where they could watch the soldiers practice without any risk. Staff Sergeant Williams was conducting the training session, working with a group of newer recruits who were struggling with their accuracy. The sergeant was known for his gruff exterior but patient teaching style. He had trained hundreds of soldiers over his 15-year career, including David Chin during his early days at the base. As Sarah watched the training session, she began making quiet observations about the soldiers' techniques. Her mother was surprised to hear the 8-year-old commenting on breathing patterns, stance adjustments, and trigger control. These weren't concepts that most children would understand, but Sarah spoke about them with startling familiarity. "That soldier is jerking the trigger," Sarah whispered to her mother, pointing to one of the recruits. "Daddy said that's the most common mistake new shooters make. He needs to squeeze straight back, like squeezing a lemon without twisting it." Linda Chen stared at her daughter in amazement. She knew that David had shared his love of marksmanship with Sarah, taking her to civilian shooting ranges and teaching her about gun safety and technique. But she hadn't realized just how much knowledge the child had absorbed. Several soldiers nearby overheard Sarah's comment and exchanged skeptical looks. The idea that an 8-year-old girl could accurately diagnose shooting problems seemed ridiculous to them. Children didn't understand the complexities of marksmanship, no matter how much their parents might have taught them. Sergeant Thompson found himself listening more carefully to Sarah's observations as the training session continued. The child continued to make comments about the soldiers' techniques, pointing out specific errors and suggesting corrections. Her analysis was remarkably accurate, identifying problems that the instructors were also noting. When one recruit struggled with a particularly difficult shot sequence, Sarah quietly explained to her mother what the soldier was doing wrong and how he could improve his performance. Her assessment was detailed and technically sound, covering everything from body position to sight alignment. The more Sarah spoke, the more attention she attracted from the surrounding soldiers. Some were amused by the sight of a small child in oversized camouflage gear offering shooting advice. Others were beginning to take her observations more seriously, recognizing that her comments demonstrated genuine understanding of marksmanship principles. As the training session progressed, word began to spread among the soldiers about the little girl who was providing running commentary on shooting techniques. Some came over to listen, curious about what an 8-year-old might have to say about military marksmanship. The attention made Sarah slightly self-conscious, but she continued to watch the training with intense focus. Colonel Martinez found herself paying close attention to Sarah's comments as well. The child's knowledge was impressive, but what struck the colonel most was the way Sarah spoke about shooting. There was a respect and seriousness in her tone that reflected proper training and genuine understanding of the responsibility that came with handling firearms. When the formal training session ended, Staff Sergeant Williams approached the observation area where Sarah and her family were standing. He had heard about David Chen's daughter and wanted to meet the child of one of the finest marksmen he had ever trained. "You must be David's little girl," Williams said gently, kneeling down to Sarah's eye level. "Your daddy was the best shot I ever had the privilege to work with. He could put a bullet through a dime at 300 meters. Sarah's face brightened at the mention of her father's skill. "He taught me that good shooting isn't about being tough or strong," she replied. "He said it was about being calm and patient and respecting the weapon. He said the best shooters are the ones who think before they shoot." The sergeant nodded approvingly. David had clearly passed on more than just technical knowledge to his daughter. He had instilled in her the proper mindset and respect that every good marksman needed to develop. As the group prepared to continue their tour, several soldiers lingered around Sarah, impressed by her knowledge and maturity. She answered their questions about her father's training methods and shared stories about the lessons he had taught her. The adults found themselves genuinely enjoying their conversation with the 8-year-old, who seemed wise beyond her years. The morning tour continued through various base facilities, including the communication center, the motor pool, and the medical facility. At each stop, Sarah asked thoughtful questions and made observations that impressed the soldiers assigned to guide them. She demonstrated knowledge about military equipment, procedures, and protocols that most civilians never learned. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the base about David Chen's remarkable daughter. Soldiers who hadn't met her were curious about the 8-year-old who apparently understood military operations better than some recruits. The story was growing with each telling, and Sarah was becoming something of a celebrity among the troops. During lunch in the main dining facility, Sarah sat with her mother and several officers, continuing to discuss military life with enthusiasm and intelligence. She asked about her father's service record, wanting to understand the specific missions he had participated in and the skills that had made him valuable to his unit. The conversation revealed that David had shared extensive knowledge with his daughter about military culture, strategy, and tactics. He had clearly seen potential in Sarah and had taken the time to educate her properly about the responsibilities and realities of military service. As the afternoon approached, the planned ceremony was scheduled to take place in the main auditorium. Sarah would receive her father's medals and a flag that had been flown over the base in his honor. But, before the formal ceremony, Colonel Martinez had arranged for one final stop on the tour. The group was heading to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Facility, where the base's most skilled shooters honed their long-distance accuracy. It was here that David Chen had set several base records, including a remarkable shot at 800 meters that had become legendary among the troops. As they walked toward the advanced facility, Sarah's excitement was evident. This was the place where her father had truly excelled, where his natural talent and dedicated training had earned him recognition as one of the finest marksmen in the entire division. The advanced marksmanship facility was impressive even by military standards. The range extended out to 1,000 meters, with sophisticated target systems and environmental monitoring equipment. It was here that soldiers prepared for the most demanding shooting scenarios they might face in combat situations. Today, a group of experienced marksmen were conducting advanced training exercises. These were seasoned soldiers, many with combat experience, working to maintain and improve their long-distance shooting skills. The level of precision required for their exercises was extraordinary, demanding perfect technique and mental discipline. Sarah watched the advanced training with fascination, absorbing every detail of the complex procedures involved in long-distance marksmanship. The soldiers were using high-powered rifles with sophisticated optics, taking careful measurements of wind speed and direction before attempting their shots. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah's knowledge and enthusiasm continued to impress everyone she met. She was no longer just David Chen's daughter receiving a ceremonial honor. She had become a remarkable young person in her own right, someone who commanded respect through her intelligence, maturity, and genuine understanding of military culture. The stage was being set for something none of them could have predicted. Sarah's day at the base was about to take a turn that would challenge every assumption the soldiers had about age, ability, and what it truly meant to carry on a legacy of excellence. The advanced marksmanship instructor, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, was a legend in his own right. With 22 years of military service and multiple combat deployments, he had trained some of the finest shooters in the Army. His weathered hands and steady gaze spoke of countless hours spent perfecting the art of precision shooting. As Sarah and her group approached the instructor's station, Rodriguez was in the middle of explaining wind compensation techniques to his students. The Master Sergeant's voice carried the authority of experience as he demonstrated the complex calculations involved in long-distance shooting. At 800 meters, a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind will push your bullet approximately 14 inches off target, Rodriguez was saying. That's the difference between a perfect shot and a complete miss. Everything has to be perfect: your breathing, your trigger pull, your body position, even your mental state. Sarah listened intently to every word, occasionally nodding as if she understood concepts that would challenge most adults. Her small hands were clasped behind her back in a parade rest position that her father had taught her, showing the same respect and attention that the adult soldiers were giving to the instruction. When Rodriguez noticed the group of visitors, he paused his lesson and approached Colonel Martinez. Word had already reached him about David Chen's daughter and her impressive knowledge of marksmanship. He was curious to meet the child who had apparently inherited her father's passion for precision shooting. "This must be David's little girl," Rodriguez said warmly, extending his hand to Sarah. "Your father was one of the finest students I ever had the honor to train. He had natural talent, but, more importantly, he had the discipline to develop that talent into real skill." Sarah shook the master sergeant's hand with surprising firmness for someone her size. "Daddy always talked about you," she replied. "He said you taught him that shooting was like meditation, you had to find the quiet place inside yourself where nothing existed except you and the target." Rodriguez raised his eyebrows, impressed by the child's understanding of the mental aspects of marksmanship. Those were advanced concepts that many soldiers struggled to grasp, yet this 8-year-old spoke about them with genuine comprehension. The afternoon training session was focusing on 500-meter precision shooting, a distance that required significant skill and experience. The targets were barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as small dots against the desert backdrop. Each shot demanded perfect execution of multiple technical elements, with no room for error. As Sarah watched the soldiers attempt their shots, she began making quiet observations again. Her analysis was even more detailed than it had been at the basic range, covering advanced topics like barrel harmonics, scope parallax, and environmental effects on bullet trajectory. "That soldier's scope isn't properly zeroed," Sarah whispered to her mother. "See how all his shots are grouping low and to the right? He needs to adjust his elevation turret up about 6 clicks and his windage 2 clicks right." The comment was overheard by Sergeant Michael Foster, a young soldier who had been struggling with his accuracy all afternoon. Foster was relatively new to long-distance shooting and had been growing increasingly frustrated with his poor performance. The idea that an 8-year-old girl might be able to diagnose his problem struck him as absurd. "Excuse me, little lady," Foster said with barely concealed amusement. "But I think the adults here have got this covered. Maybe you should leave the shooting advice to people who actually know what they're doing." The comment drew attention from other soldiers nearby. Some looked uncomfortable at Foster's dismissive tone toward a child, especially one whose father had died serving their country. Others seemed to share his sentiment that an 8-year-old had no business offering technical advice to trained soldiers. Sarah looked up at Foster with calm, serious eyes. "I was just trying to help," she said quietly. "Daddy taught me that shooters should help each other get better. He said pride was the enemy of accuracy." Foster's face reddened slightly at the gentle rebuke from someone a fraction of his size. Several of his fellow soldiers were now watching the interaction with interest, waiting to see how he would respond to being corrected by David Chen's daughter. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, sensing the tension in the situation. He had worked with Foster before and knew the young soldier was struggling with confidence issues that were affecting his shooting. The sergeant also remembered David Chen's exceptional ability to help other shooters improve their performance. "Actually, Sergeant Foster," Rodriguez said calmly, "why don't you show us your last target? Let's see what kind of group you've been shooting." Foster reluctantly retrieved his target from the 500-meter line, knowing that his shots had been disappointingly scattered. The paper showed a loose group of bullet holes, most clustered in the lower right quadrant of the target. It was exactly the pattern Sarah had described, consistently low and right of the intended point of impact. Rodriguez examined the target carefully, then looked at Sarah with newfound respect. The child had accurately diagnosed Foster's shooting problem from a distance, identifying a specific technical issue that required considerable knowledge to recognize. "Miss Chen is correct," Rodriguez announced to the group. "This is a classic zero problem. Your scope adjustments are off by approximately the amount she suggested. The question is, how did an 8-year-old spot something that you missed?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Foster stared at Sarah with a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. The other soldiers exchanged glances, unsure whether to be impressed by the child's skill or concerned about Foster's competence. Sarah sensed the awkwardness of the situation and tried to diffuse it. "Daddy spent lots of time teaching me to read targets," she explained. "He said it was like solving puzzles. You look at where the holes are and work backwards to figure out what went wrong." The explanation only made Foster more defensive. The idea that his shooting problems could be solved by a little girl in a costume uniform was too much for his ego to handle. Other soldiers began making quiet jokes about Foster needing shooting lessons from a third grader. "This is ridiculous," Foster muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's just a kid playing dress up." There's no way she actually understands what she's talking about. She's probably just repeating stuff her dad told her. The comment created an uncomfortable silence among the group. Colonel Martinez stepped forward, ready to address Foster's inappropriate behavior, but Sarah spoke first. "Would you like me to show you?" Sarah asked simply. "I mean, if there's a rifle I could safely use?" Daddy always said the best way to prove you understand something is to demonstrate it. The suggestion caught everyone off guard. The idea of an 8-year-old actually shooting on a military rifle range seemed impossible. Safety regulations alone would prohibit such a thing, regardless of the child's claimed knowledge. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found himself in an unusual position. Military protocol clearly prohibited unauthorized personnel from using weapons on the range. But Sarah wasn't exactly unauthorized, she was the daughter of a fallen soldier, being honored by the base. More importantly, her technical knowledge was proving to be remarkably accurate. "Sarah," her mother said gently, "I don't think that's such a good idea. These are very powerful weapons, much different from the rifles you used with Daddy at the civilian range." But Sarah's suggestion had captured the imagination of several soldiers who remembered David Chen's legendary shooting ability. They were curious whether his daughter had inherited not just his knowledge, but his natural talent as well. Foster saw an opportunity to definitively prove his point about the child's limitations. "You know what," he said loudly, "I think that's a great idea. Let's see if she can actually back up all this expert advice she's been giving out." Colonel Martinez immediately stepped in to halt the discussion. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "We cannot have civilians using military weapons on our range. The liability and safety issues alone make it impossible." But the idea had taken hold among some of the soldiers. They began discussing whether there might be some way to safely allow Sarah to demonstrate her knowledge. Perhaps with extensive safety precautions and using a smaller caliber weapon. Rodriguez found himself genuinely intrigued by the possibility. He had trained thousands of shooters over his career, and he had never encountered anyone with Sarah's combination of technical knowledge and calm confidence. If David Chen had truly taught his daughter to shoot, the results could be extraordinary. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully to Colonel Martinez, "we do have the .22 caliber training rifles that we use for basic marksmanship instruction. They're much smaller and safer than the standard military weapons. If the child has proper civilian training, it might be possible to arrange something under controlled conditions." The suggestion created a buzz of excitement among the soldiers. The .22 rifles were indeed much safer, with minimal recoil and noise. They were specifically designed for training new shooters, including young people in civilian shooting programs. Sarah looked up at the adults with hopeful eyes. "I have my youth shooting certification from the National Rifle Association," she said quietly. "Daddy made sure I learned all the safety rules before he taught me to shoot. I know how to handle firearms safely." The revelation that Sarah had formal civilian training credentials changed the dynamic of the conversation. NRA youth programs were highly respected for their safety standards and comprehensive instruction. If Sarah had completed that training, she would have demonstrated competence with firearms under professional supervision. Colonel Martinez found herself in an unprecedented situation. She had never encountered a request like this, and there was no clear policy guidance for handling it. On one hand, allowing a child to use weapons on a military range was fraught with risks. On the other hand, the child appeared to have proper training and credentials. The decision was further complicated by the presence of Sergeant Foster, whose skeptical comments had turned the situation into something of a challenge. If Sarah was denied the opportunity to demonstrate her skills, it might appear that the military was backing down from a confrontation initiated by one of their own soldiers. Foster himself was now having second thoughts about his challenge to the 8-year-old. The more he learned about Sarah's training and knowledge, the less confident he became about the outcome of any demonstration. But, with all the attention focused on the situation, he couldn't back down without losing face. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward with a suggestion that might resolve the dilemma. "Ma'am, what if we set up a very controlled demonstration using the indoor range? We could use the smallest caliber training rifles, with extensive safety protocols. If Miss Chen truly has the training she claims, it would honor her father's memory to see his instruction put to good use." The proposal gained support from several other experienced instructors who were curious about Sarah's actual abilities. They argued that the demonstration could be educational for all the soldiers present, showing the importance of proper training and the value of starting young shooters with good fundamentals. Linda Chen had remained quiet during most of the discussion, but now she spoke up. Sarah has been shooting with adult supervision since she was 6 years old, she said. David was very careful about her training. She knows all the safety rules, and she's actually quite good. But I'm worried about the pressure of performing in front of all these soldiers. Sarah looked up at her mother with determination. I want to do it, Mom. I want to show them that Daddy was a good teacher, and that everything he taught me was important. The emotional appeal touched everyone present. This wasn't just about proving a point or winning an argument. For Sarah, it was about honoring her father's memory and demonstrating that his time and effort in training her had been worthwhile. Colonel Martinez made the decision that would change everything. Master Sergeant Rodriguez set up a controlled demonstration on the indoor range. Minimum safety distance, .22 caliber only, and full safety protocols. If Miss Chen wants to honor her father's training, then we'll give her that opportunity. The announcement created a stir of excitement among the soldiers. Word began to spread throughout the base that David Chen's 8-year-old daughter was going to demonstrate her shooting skills. What had started as a routine ceremonial visit was turning into something much more significant. As the group moved toward the indoor training facility, Foster found himself walking beside Sarah. The young soldier was beginning to realize that he might have made a serious mistake in challenging the child. Her calm confidence and technical knowledge were unlike anything he had expected. Listen, kid, Foster said quietly, you don't have to do this just because I was being stupid. Nobody's going to think less of you if you change your mind. Sarah looked up at him with a small smile. Thank you for worrying about me, she said, but Daddy always said that if you know how to do something well, you should be willing to show it. He said hiding your skills doesn't help anyone get better. The simple wisdom in her words made Foster feel even worse about his earlier comments. This wasn't just a little girl playing soldier, this was someone who had been carefully taught valuable lessons about skill, responsibility, and service to others. As they approached the indoor range, anticipation was building among everyone present. Some soldiers were eager to see if Sarah could live up to her impressive talk. Others were hoping she would succeed as a way of honoring David Chen's memory. A few were simply curious about what an 8-year-old could accomplish with proper training. The indoor facility was state-of-the-art, with computerized target systems and environmental controls that eliminated weather variables. It was here that the base's most precise shooting was done, where records were set and reputations were made. Master Sergeant Rodriguez began setting up the demonstration with meticulous attention to safety. He selected the smallest available training rifle, checked and double-checked all safety equipment, and established clear protocols for the exercise. Nothing would be left to chance. As the preparations continued, more soldiers began arriving at the facility. Word had spread quickly through the base about the unusual demonstration that was about to take place. Officers and enlisted personnel alike were curious to witness this unprecedented event. Sarah stood quietly beside her mother, watching the preparations with the same focused attention she had shown all day. There was no sign of nervousness or uncertainty in her demeanor. If anything, she seemed to be looking forward to the opportunity to honor her father's memory through the skills he had taught her. The stage was set for a demonstration that would challenge everyone's assumptions about age, ability, and the power of proper training. What happened next would be remembered at Forward Operating Base Apache for years to come. The indoor range fell silent as Master Sergeant Rodriguez completed his safety briefing. Nearly 40 soldiers had gathered to witness the demonstration, creating an atmosphere of intense anticipation. Sarah stood at the firing line, dwarfed by the military personnel surrounding her, but showing no signs of intimidation. The rifle Rodriguez had selected was a youth model .22 caliber training weapon, specifically designed for smaller shooters. Even so, it looked oversized in Sarah's small hands. Her miniature camouflage uniform and serious expression created a striking image that would be burned into the memory of everyone present. Before we begin, Rodriguez announced to the assembled group, I want to emphasize that this is a controlled demonstration under strict safety protocols. Ms. Chen has provided documentation of her civilian training credentials, and we will be following all established procedures for youth shooter programs. He turned to Sarah, his voice taking on the gentle but serious tone he used with all new shooters. Sarah, I need you to show me the 4 fundamental rules of firearm safety. Can you do that? Without hesitation, Sarah recited the rules her father had drilled into her from the very beginning of her training. Always treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Never point the muzzle at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Be sure of your target and what's beyond it. The precision and confidence with which she delivered the safety rules impressed the watching soldiers. These weren't just memorized words. Sarah spoke with the understanding that came from proper instruction and repeated practice. Rodriguez nodded approvingly and handed Sarah protective eyewear and ear protection sized for her small head. These are non-negotiable, he explained. Safety equipment must be worn at all times on the range, regardless of your skill level or experience. As Sarah adjusted her safety gear, Sergeant Foster found himself hoping that she would perform well. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by a growing respect for the child's knowledge and maturity. The last thing he wanted was for her to fail and embarrass herself in front of the entire gathering. The target for the demonstration was set at 50 meters, a reasonable distance for a .22 caliber rifle and well within the capabilities of a properly trained young shooter. It was far enough to require genuine skill, but close enough to ensure safety and provide clear results. Rodriguez began with a brief equipment inspection, checking the rifle's condition and ensuring that all safety systems were functioning properly. Sarah watched every step of the process, asking intelligent questions about the weapon's characteristics and proper handling procedures. This rifle has a slightly different trigger than what you might be used to, Rodriguez explained as he made final adjustments. It breaks at about 3 pounds of pressure, which is fairly standard for training weapons. The sight radius is shorter than adult rifles, but the principles remain the same. Sarah nodded understanding and asked if she could dry fire the weapon a few times to familiarize herself with the trigger. The request demonstrated exactly the kind of careful preparation that marked experienced shooters. Rodriguez allowed her to practice the trigger pull several times with an empty chamber, noting her proper finger placement and smooth technique. As the demonstration moved toward the actual shooting phase, tension in the room was palpable. Some soldiers were quietly placing informal bets on Sarah's performance, while others simply watched with fascination as the smallest person they had ever seen on a military range prepared to fire. Colonel Martinez positioned herself where she could observe both Sarah and the assembled soldiers. The colonel was acutely aware that this demonstration had implications beyond simple marksmanship. It was about respect, tradition, and the legacy that David Chen had left behind through his daughter's training. Sarah's mother stood nearby, her face showing a mixture of pride and anxiety. She knew her daughter's capabilities, having watched David work with Sarah for over 2 years. But the pressure of performing in front of so many military personnel was unlike anything Sarah had experienced before. The moment of truth arrived as Rodriguez loaded a single round into the rifle and placed it in Sarah's hands. The weight and balance of the weapon seemed familiar to her, despite its military origins. Her father's training had emphasized adaptability, the ability to adjust quickly to different rifles and shooting conditions. "Take your time," Rodriguez instructed quietly. "There's no rush. Get comfortable with your position, check your sight alignment, and fire when you're ready. Remember, this is about demonstrating proper technique, not setting records." Sarah moved to the shooting bench with the smooth, practiced motions of someone who had been properly trained. She adjusted the rifle rest to accommodate her shorter stature, settled into a comfortable position, and began the deliberate process of aligning her sights on the target. The watching soldiers observed her pre-shot routine with growing amazement. Every movement was purposeful and controlled, following a sequence that had clearly been practiced hundreds of times. There was nothing hurried or uncertain about her preparation. Through the rifle scope, Sarah could see the target clearly despite the 50-meter distance. Her father had taught her to shoot at much longer ranges on civilian rifles, so this distance felt comfortable and manageable. She controlled her breathing, allowing her body to settle into the natural respiratory pause that experienced shooters used for their most accurate shots. The first shot broke cleanly, with Sarah following through properly and maintaining her sight picture to observe the bullet's impact. The sound of the .22 caliber rifle was relatively quiet in the controlled environment, but the effect on the watching crowd was profound. Rodriguez examined the target through his spotting scope and announced the result in a voice that carried clearly through the range. "Perfect center hit. Dead center of the bullseye at 50 meters." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and scattered applause. Many of the soldiers had expected Sarah to hit the target, but few had anticipated such immediate precision. A perfect center hit on the first shot was impressive for any shooter, regardless of age or experience. Foster stared at the target in disbelief. He had been shooting for 3 years and rarely achieved such accuracy, especially under pressure. The sight of an 8-year-old girl outperforming him on her first shot was both humbling and inspiring. Rodriguez reloaded the rifle and handed it back to Sarah. "That was excellent," he said with genuine admiration. "Would you like to try a few more shots to show that it wasn't just luck?" Sarah accepted the challenge with quiet confidence. Over the next 10 minutes, she fired 9 more rounds at the same target, each shot following the same careful preparation routine. Her consistency was remarkable, with every bullet striking within a 3-inch group centered on the bullseye. As the demonstration continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted from skepticism to genuine awe. The soldiers weren't just watching a child shoot well, they were witnessing a level of fundamental marksmanship that many of them struggled to achieve consistently. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had trained thousands of shooters during his career, but he had never seen anything quite like this. Sarah's technique was flawless, her mental approach was mature, and her results were exceptional. More importantly, she was demonstrating the kind of shooting fundamentals that he spent months trying to teach experienced soldiers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced to the group, "what you're seeing is the result of exceptional instruction combined with natural talent and dedicated practice. This young lady has been taught proper marksmanship fundamentals at a level that many military shooters never achieve." The praise from such a respected instructor carried significant weight among the assembled soldiers. Rodriguez was known for his high standards and reluctance to offer compliments unless they were truly earned. His endorsement of Sarah's abilities was tantamount to official recognition of her skill. Colonel Martinez stepped forward to examine Sarah's target personally. The 10-shot group was impressive by any standard, measuring less than 3 inches at 50 meters. For a child shooting an unfamiliar rifle under pressure, it was extraordinary. "Miss Chen," the colonel said formally, "on behalf of Forward Operating Base Apache, I want to thank you for this demonstration. You have honored your father's memory by showing us the quality of instruction he provided and the dedication you've shown in developing these skills." Sarah set down the rifle carefully, following all safety protocols as she had been taught. "Thank you, ma'am," she replied. "Daddy always said that shooting was about patience and practice, not about being big or strong. He said anyone could learn to do it well if they respected the weapon and worked hard to improve." The wisdom in her words resonated with the experienced shooters in the room. They recognized the truth of her father's teaching, that marksmanship was indeed about fundamentals and mental discipline rather than physical attributes. As the formal demonstration concluded, several soldiers approached Sarah to congratulate her and ask questions about her training. They were genuinely curious about the methods her father had used and the progression of skills he had taught her. Sergeant Foster was among those who came forward, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by respect and admiration. "I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I was wrong to doubt your knowledge, and I was disrespectful. You show me that I have a lot to learn about shooting, regardless of how long I've been in the Army." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, showing the same maturity she had displayed throughout the day. "Daddy always said that good shooters help each other improve," she replied. "Maybe we could practice together sometime, and I could show you some of the techniques he taught me." The offer to help Foster improve his shooting was made without any trace of condescension or superiority. Sarah genuinely wanted to share her father's knowledge in the same spirit that he had shared it with her, as a way of helping others achieve their potential. Rodriguez approached Sarah as the crowd began to disperse, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah, I want to ask you something important. Would you be interested in helping us with our training programs? Your father's techniques seem to produce remarkable results, and we could learn a lot from studying his methods." The suggestion surprised everyone, including Colonel Martinez. The idea of incorporating lessons from an 8-year-old into military training programs was unprecedented, but Rodriguez's reasoning was sound. If David Chen's teaching methods could produce such extraordinary results, they deserved serious study. Sarah looked to her mother for guidance before responding. Linda Chen had watched her daughter's performance with a mixture of pride and amazement. She had known Sarah was skilled, but seeing her excel under such pressure was both thrilling and overwhelming. "I would like that," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Daddy always said his techniques came from studying lots of different instructors and taking the best parts from each one. Maybe I could share what he taught me, and learn new things from your instructors too." The suggestion opened up possibilities that none of them had considered when the day began. What had started as a ceremonial visit was evolving into something that could have lasting impact on the base's training programs. As the group prepared to leave the range, word of Sarah's performance was already spreading throughout the base. Soldiers who hadn't witnessed the demonstration were hearing detailed accounts from those who had, and the story was growing more impressive with each telling. The afternoon ceremony to honor David Chen's service took on new significance in light of his daughter's demonstration. The medals and commendations being awarded weren't just recognition of past service, they were also acknowledgement of a legacy that was continuing through the next generation. But the day's events had revealed something unexpected about that legacy. David Chen hadn't just been an exceptional soldier, he had also been an exceptional teacher. The skills and knowledge he had passed on to his daughter were evidence of his dedication to sharing his expertise and ensuring that important traditions would continue. As they walked toward the main auditorium for the ceremony, Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers who wanted to hear more about her father's training methods. She answered their questions patiently, sharing stories and techniques that painted a picture of a dedicated instructor who had found joy in teaching his daughter the same skills that had made him successful. The transformation in how the soldiers viewed Sarah was complete. She was no longer just a little girl in a costume uniform receiving a ceremonial honor. She had earned their respect through demonstrated competence and proven that age was no barrier to genuine skill. But, perhaps most importantly, she had shown them that the values and traditions they served to protect were indeed being passed on to the next generation. Through her father's careful instruction and her own dedication to learning, Sarah had become a living testament to the enduring importance of their mission. The ceremony that followed would officially recognize David Chen's service and sacrifice. But, for those who had witnessed Sarah's demonstration, the real tribute to his memory had already taken place on the rifle range, where his daughter had honored his legacy by putting his teachings into practice with grace, skill, and dignity that would have made him proud. The main auditorium at Forward Operating Base Apache was packed beyond capacity. Word of Sarah's extraordinary demonstration at the rifle range had spread throughout the entire installation, drawing soldiers from every unit and department. What was supposed to be a small, respectful ceremony had become the most anticipated event the base had seen in months. Colonel Martinez stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of camouflage uniforms filling every available seat and lining the walls. In the front row, Sarah sat beside her mother, still wearing her miniature military fatigues, now with added significance that everyone in the room understood. The child who had arrived that morning as David Chen's daughter had become something more, a symbol of excellence, tradition, and the power of dedicated instruction. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Martinez began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. We gather today to honor the memory of Staff Sergeant David Chen, a soldier who exemplified the highest standards of our profession. But, we have also discovered today that his greatest achievement may not have been his own service, but the legacy he created through the instruction of his daughter. The audience erupted in sustained applause, with many soldiers rising to their feet in recognition of both father and daughter. Sarah looked around the auditorium with wide eyes, overwhelmed by the response from so many military personnel. The attention was far beyond anything she had expected when the day began. As the applause subsided, Colonel Martinez continued with the formal presentation of David Chen's posthumous medals. Each award was announced with a description of the actions that had earned it, painting a picture of a soldier who had consistently gone beyond the call of duty in service to his country and his fellow troops. The Bronze Star with V device for valor in combat was presented first, recognizing David's actions during a firefight in Afghanistan where he had provided cover fire that allowed wounded soldiers to be evacuated safely. The citation described how his accurate marksmanship had held enemy forces at bay for over an hour under intense fire. As Sarah accepted the medal on her father's behalf, several soldiers in the audience reflected on their own experiences with David Chen. They remembered his willingness to help other soldiers improve their shooting, his patient instruction during training exercises, and his dedication to sharing his knowledge with anyone who wanted to learn. The Army Commendation Medal followed, honoring David's role as a marksmanship instructor who had trained hundreds of soldiers during his career. The citation specifically mentioned his innovative teaching methods and his ability to help struggling shooters achieve significant improvements in their accuracy and confidence. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had provided input for this particular citation, describing how David's teaching techniques had produced measurable improvements in unit marksmanship scores. The methods he had developed were being studied for possible incorporation into official training programs across the military. When Sarah stood to receive this medal, Rodriguez found himself thinking about the demonstration he had witnessed earlier. The child's performance had validated everything he had observed about David's teaching abilities. Here was living proof that his methods could produce extraordinary results when properly applied. The final award was the Purple Heart, recognizing David's wounds and the action that had ultimately claimed his life. The citation described how he had continued to provide accurate fire support even after being wounded, helping to ensure the success of his unit's mission despite his injuries. This medal carried special significance for Sarah, representing her father's ultimate sacrifice and service to his country. As she held the Purple Heart, she understood in a way that few 8-year-old children could that her father had given his life to protect others and uphold the values represented by the soldiers surrounding her. Following the medal presentation, Colonel Martinez announced a surprise addition to the ceremony. Today, we have also witnessed an extraordinary demonstration of the training and values that Staff Sergeant Chen passed on to his daughter. In recognition of Sarah Chan's outstanding marksmanship skills and her embodiment of military values, Forward Operating Base Apache is establishing the David Chen Excellence in Marksmanship Award. The announcement caught everyone by surprise, including Sarah and her mother. The creation of a permanent award in David's honor was an unprecedented gesture that reflected the impact his teaching methods had made on the base's leadership. This annual award will recognize soldiers who demonstrate exceptional marksmanship skills combined with the willingness to help others improve their abilities, Colonel Martinez continued. It honors both technical excellence and the teaching spirit that made Staff Sergeant Chen such a valuable member of our community. The first recipient of the award was announced immediately, Sergeant Foster, the young soldier who had initially challenged Sarah's knowledge but had later shown genuine humility and willingness to learn from her instruction. His selection reflected the base leadership's emphasis on personal growth and the courage to admit mistakes. Foster approached the podium with visible emotion, clearly moved by the recognition and the circumstances that had led to it. His speech was brief but heartfelt, acknowledging his initial skepticism about Sarah's abilities and expressing gratitude for the lessons he had learned about keeping an open mind and respecting knowledge regardless of its source. What I learned today, Foster said, looking directly at Sarah, is that wisdom can come from anyone who has been properly taught and who approaches their skills with the right attitude. Sarah Chen has shown me that age is no barrier to excellence, and that the best way to honor someone's memory is to carry forward their teachings. The ceremony continued with presentations from several other speakers who had served with David Chen or had been influenced by his instruction. Each speaker emphasized different aspects of his character, his dedication to excellence, his patience with struggling students, his innovative teaching methods, and his commitment to helping others succeed. Captain James Wright, who had served as David's platoon leader during his deployment to Afghanistan, spoke about his leadership qualities and combat effectiveness. David Chen was the kind of soldier you wanted beside you in a firefight, Wright said. His accuracy with a rifle was legendary, but it was his calm under pressure and his concern for his fellow soldiers that made him truly exceptional. The captain's words painted a picture of a complete soldier, someone who excelled not just in technical skills but in the character traits that defined the best military leaders. His influence extended far beyond his individual performance to encompass it. Sarah took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the podium with the same quiet confidence she had shown at the rifle range. The auditorium fell completely silent as Sarah adjusted the microphone to her height and looked out at the sea of faces. When she began to speak, her voice was clear and steady, carrying the wisdom that her father had instilled in her through years of patient instruction. "My daddy always told me that being good at something wasn't about being the best or showing off," Sarah began. "He said the real purpose of having skills was to help other people and to serve something bigger than yourself. That's why he joined the army, and that's why he spent so much time teaching me." The simple words carried profound meaning for the soldiers listening. They recognized in Sarah's speech the same values and principles that had drawn them to military service, the desire to serve others and to use their abilities for a greater purpose. Sarah continued, her confidence growing as she spoke. "Daddy taught me that shooting wasn't really about guns or targets. It was about discipline and patience and respecting the responsibility that comes with having dangerous skills. He said that every shot you take should make you a better person, not just a better shooter." The philosophical depth of her father's instruction was evident in Sarah's words. David Chen hadn't just taught his daughter technical skills, he had instilled in her a complete understanding of the ethical and moral dimensions of marksmanship that many adult shooters never fully grasped. "I want to thank all of you for letting me visit Daddy's base and for being so nice to me and my mom," Sarah concluded. "I hope that someday I can serve others the way that Daddy did, and the way that all of you do every day. He would be really proud to know that his friends are still helping people learn and get better." The ovation that followed Sarah's speech was the longest and most enthusiastic of the entire ceremony. Soldiers throughout the auditorium were visibly moved by her words, recognizing in them the essence of what they had all sworn to uphold when they took their military oaths. As Sarah returned to her seat, Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward to make an announcement that would complete the day's transformation from routine ceremony to historic occasion. "Colonel Martinez, with your permission, I would like to extend an invitation to Miss Chen to serve as an honorary instructor for our advanced marksmanship program." The proposal represented an extraordinary departure from normal military procedures. Never before had someone so young been invited to contribute to official training programs. But Rodriguez's suggestion reflected the genuine impact that Sarah's demonstration had made on the base's most experienced instructors. The techniques that Staff Sergeant Chen developed and passed on to his daughter deserve formal study and documentation, Rodriguez explained. "If we can understand and replicate his teaching methods, we could significantly improve our training programs and help more soldiers achieve their potential." Colonel Martinez considered the proposal carefully. From a practical standpoint, it made sense. David Chen's methods had clearly produced remarkable results, and studying them could benefit the entire military. From a ceremonial standpoint, it would create a lasting connection between the base and the Chen family that honored David's memory in a meaningful way. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," the colonel replied formally, "I approve your recommendation. Sarah Chen is hereby appointed as honorary youth advisor to the Forward Operating Base Apache Advanced Marksmanship Program. Her insights into her father's teaching methods will be invaluable to our continuing mission of training excellence." The appointment was greeted with thunderous applause from the assembled soldiers. Sarah found herself with an official military title and responsibility, something that no one could have imagined when she walked onto the base that morning. As the ceremony drew to a close, the transformation that had occurred throughout the day was complete. Sarah had arrived as David Chen's daughter, receiving honors on his behalf. She was leaving as an individual in her own right, with recognized expertise and an official role in continuing her father's legacy of excellence in instruction. The soldiers filing out of the auditorium carried with them a new understanding of the importance of proper training and the value of keeping an open mind about potential sources of wisdom and knowledge. Many made mental notes to approach their own training with renewed seriousness and to look for opportunities to help others improve their skills. For Sarah, the day had been a journey of discovery about her father's impact and her own capabilities. She had learned that the skills he had taught her were not just personal accomplishments but valuable contributions that could help others achieve their goals. As the base prepared for evening formation, word of the day's events continued to spread beyond the installation. News of the 8-year-old who had amazed a military base with her marksmanship skills was being shared through military networks, inspiring discussions about training methods, natural talent, and the importance of starting instruction at an early age. The story would eventually reach military training facilities around the world, sparking interest in David Chen's teaching techniques and generating research into more effective methods of marksmanship instruction. Sarah's demonstration had inadvertently initiated a broader examination of how the military could improve its training programs. But, for now, as the sun began to set over Forward Operating Base Apache, the most immediate impact was on the soldiers who had witnessed the day's events firsthand. They had seen proof that excellence could emerge from unexpected sources, and that the values they served to protect were indeed being passed on to the next generation. The legacy of Staff Sergeant David Chen was secure, carried forward by a daughter who embodied his teachings and would continue to honor his memory through her own commitment to excellence and service to others. The little girl in camouflage had become a symbol of hope and inspiration for everyone who had witnessed her remarkable day. 6 months after that transformative day at Forward Operating Base Apache, the impact of Sarah Chen's visit continued to ripple through military training facilities across the country. The story of the 8-year-old who had silenced an entire base with her remarkable marksmanship skills had become legend, but, more importantly, it had sparked real changes in how the military approached instruction and mentorship. Master Sergeant Rodriguez sat in his office, reviewing the latest training statistics for his advanced marksmanship program. The numbers told a remarkable story of improvement that directly correlated with the implementation of David Chen's teaching techniques, as documented and refined through extensive conversations with Sarah during her monthly visits to the base. The Chen method, as it had come to be known throughout military training circles, emphasized mental preparation and fundamental technique over raw physical strength or intimidating equipment. The approach had proven so effective that Rodriguez had been invited to present his findings at the annual military training conference in Washington, D.C. The key innovation in David Chen's approach had been his focus on teaching shooters to understand the psychological aspects of marksmanship. Rather than simply drilling physical techniques, he had taught students to manage stress, maintain focus under pressure, and develop the mental discipline that separated good shooters from great ones. Sarah's role as honorary youth advisor had evolved far beyond what anyone had initially envisioned. Her monthly visits to the base included formal training sessions where she worked with struggling soldiers, sharing the specific techniques her father had used to help her overcome various challenges. The 8-year-old had demonstrated remarkable teaching ability, explaining complex concepts in simple terms and helping frustrated soldiers understand fundamentals they had been struggling with for months. Her patience and clear communication style had earned her genuine respect from soldiers who were initially skeptical about learning from someone so young. Sergeant Foster had become one of Sarah's most successful students and strongest advocates. The young soldier who had once mocked her knowledge was now among the base's top marksmen, having improved his accuracy by over 60% through application of the Chen method principles that Sarah had taught him. "She has this way of explaining things that just make sense," Foster told other soldiers who were curious about working with the youth advisor. "She breaks down complicated stuff into simple steps, and she never makes you feel stupid for not understanding something the first time." The transformation in Foster's attitude and performance had become a powerful example for other soldiers who were struggling with their marksmanship training. His willingness to learn from an 8-year-old had initially been seen as humorous, but his dramatic improvement had convinced skeptics that effective instruction could come from unexpected sources. Colonel Martinez had received official recognition from Army Training Command for the innovative programs developed at Forward Operating Base Apache. The success of incorporating David Chen's methods into standard training had led to requests from other installations for assistance in implementing similar approaches. The colonel had also been invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee examining military training effectiveness. Her presentation would include video footage of Sarah's demonstrations and statistical data showing the measurable improvements achieved through implementation of the Chen method. Sarah's own skills had continued to develop during her monthly visits to the base. Working with military instructors had exposed her to advanced techniques and equipment that weren't available in civilian shooting programs. Her accuracy and consistency had improved to levels that amazed even the most experienced marksmen on the base. More importantly, her confidence and teaching ability had grown tremendously through her interactions with adult soldiers. The shy 8-year-old who had quietly corrected shooting techniques had become a poised young instructor who could effectively communicate with people of all ages and experience levels. Linda Chen watched her daughter's development with a mixture of pride and amazement. The transformation in Sarah's confidence and maturity had been remarkable, but more significant was her growing understanding of the responsibility that came with her unique abilities and position. "She talks about her role at the base like it's the most important thing in the world," Linda explained to friends who asked about Sarah's unusual activities. "She takes it very seriously, spending hours studying shooting techniques and practicing her teaching methods. It's like she understands that she's carrying on her father's work." The monthly visits had also provided Sarah with a connection to her father's memory that helped her process her grief in healthy ways. Working with soldiers who had known David Chen allowed her to hear new stories about his service and to understand the full scope of his impact on others. These conversations had revealed aspects of her father's character that Sarah hadn't known about: his mentorship of young soldiers, his innovative approaches to training problems, and his reputation as someone who could help struggling troops find their potential. Learning about these qualities had deepened her appreciation for the lessons he had taught her. The success of the Chen method had attracted attention from civilian shooting organizations as well. The National Rifle Association had invited Sarah to demonstrate her father's techniques at their annual convention, recognizing the potential applications for youth shooting programs across the country. Shooting sports magazines had published articles about the military's adoption of teaching methods developed by a civilian father for his young daughter. The stories had sparked discussions about the value of starting marksmanship training at early ages and the importance of emphasizing mental preparation alongside physical technique. But perhaps the most significant impact had been on the soldiers at Forward Operating Base Apache themselves. The experience of working with Sarah had challenged their assumptions about age, authority, and the sources of valuable knowledge. Many had become more open to learning from unexpected sources and more willing to question traditional approaches to training. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had initially supervised the training session where Sarah first demonstrated her knowledge, reflected on how the experience had changed his own teaching methods. "Working with her made me realize that I had been making training more complicated than it needed to be," he admitted. "Sometimes the best instruction is the simplest instruction." The base had established a formal mentorship program based on the success of Sarah's advisory role. The program paired experienced soldiers with younger troops, emphasizing the teaching responsibilities that came with expertise and encouraging the sharing of knowledge across rank and experience levels. As Sarah's 9th birthday approached, plans were being made for a special celebration at the base that would also serve as the official launch of the David Chen Center for Excellence in Marksmanship Training. The facility would be dedicated to researching and developing innovative training methods, with Sarah serving as a permanent advisory board member. The center represented the formalization of everything that had grown from that remarkable day when an 8-year-old girl had surprised an entire military base. It would ensure that David Chen's legacy and teaching methods would continue to benefit future generations of soldiers and civilian shooters alike. On a warm spring morning, exactly 1 year after her first visit to the base, Sarah Chen stood once again at the rifle range at Forward Operating Base Apache. This time, however, she wasn't demonstrating her skills to skeptical soldiers. She was teaching a class of advanced marksmen who had requested her instruction in the Chen method principles. The transformation in how she was received was complete. The soldiers in her class treated her with the respect accorded to any expert instructor, asking detailed questions about technique and seeking her advice on overcoming specific challenges. Age had become irrelevant in the face of demonstrated competence and proven results. As Sarah worked with individual students, correcting their form and explaining the mental aspects of accurate shooting, observers could see clear echoes of her father's patient teaching style. She had internalized not just his technical knowledge but his approach to instruction, emphasizing understanding over memorization and building confidence through gradual skill development. The class included soldiers from several different units, including some who had traveled from other bases specifically to learn the Chen method from its primary practitioner. Word had spread throughout the military that training with Sarah Chen could produce remarkable improvements in marksmanship performance. Master Sergeant Rodriguez watched the session with satisfaction, knowing that he was witnessing something unprecedented in military training history. Never before had a child served as an instructor for experienced adult soldiers, and certainly never with such obvious success and acceptance. The session concluded with Sarah leading a discussion about the psychological preparation techniques her father had taught her. The soldiers listened intently as she explained how to maintain focus under pressure, manage pre-shot anxiety, and develop the mental discipline required for consistent accuracy. "Daddy always said that the hardest part of shooting wasn't hitting the target," Sarah explained to the group. "The hardest part was quieting all the noise in your head so you could focus on doing things the right way. He taught me that every shot starts in your mind, not in your hands." The wisdom in her words reflected years of careful instruction and genuine understanding of advanced marksmanship principles. The soldiers in her class recognized that they were receiving insights that could take years to develop through trial and error alone. As the formal training session ended, several students approached Sarah with additional questions and requests for individual coaching. She handled each interaction with the patience and professionalism that had become her trademark, offering specific advice tailored to each soldier's particular challenges. The drive home from the base gave Sarah time to reflect on how much her life had changed since that first visit. What had begun as a ceremonial honor for her father's service had evolved into a meaningful career that allowed her to carry forward his legacy while developing her own unique contributions to military training. Her mother noticed the quiet satisfaction on Sarah's face as they drove away from the base. "How do you feel about today's class?" Linda asked, knowing that her daughter took her teaching responsibilities very seriously. "I think Daddy would be proud," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "The soldiers are getting better, and they're starting to understand that good shooting is about more than just being tough or strong. They're learning to think about what they're doing, just like he taught me." The simple statement captured the essence of what had made the Chen method so effective and why Sarah's instruction had proven so valuable. David Chen's greatest achievement hadn't been his own exceptional marksmanship, it had been his ability to understand and teach the mental aspects of shooting that most instructors never fully addressed. As Forward Operating Base Apache prepared for evening formation, the soldiers who had participated in Sarah's class shared their experiences with colleagues who hadn't been able to attend. The enthusiasm in their discussions reflected genuine excitement about applying new techniques and approaches to their own training. The story of Sarah Chen had begun with mocking laughter from soldiers who couldn't imagine learning anything from a little girl in an oversized camouflage uniform. It had evolved into a testament to the power of excellent instruction, open minds, and the courage to challenge assumptions about age, authority, and the sources of wisdom. 1 year later, that same little girl was a respected instructor whose methods were being studied and implemented across the military. She had proven that expertise earned through proper training and demonstrated competence commanded respect regardless of the age or background of the person possessing it. The legacy of Staff Sergeant David Chen lived on through his daughter's continuing work, but it had grown beyond what even he might have imagined. His teaching methods had become part of official military training doctrine, his approach to mentorship had inspired new programs, and his emphasis on the mental aspects of marksmanship had revolutionized how the Army thought about instruction. But, perhaps most importantly, his daughter had learned to carry forward not just his technical knowledge but his spirit of service and dedication to helping others achieve their potential. Through her work at the base, Sarah was ensuring that her father's greatest lessons about patience, respect, and the responsibility that comes with skill would continue to influence future generations of soldiers. The little girl who had once been mocked for wearing camouflage had grown into a young teacher whose impact on military training would be felt for years to come. She had honored her father's memory in the most meaningful way possible by using his teachings to serve others and by proving that his legacy would endure through the lives he had touched and the knowledge he had shared. As the sun set over forward operating Base Apache, the story of the day that changed everything continued to inspire everyone who had witnessed it. It reminded them that heroes come in all sizes, that wisdom can emerge from unexpected sources, and that the most important battles are often won not with weapons, but with patience, teaching, and the courage to believe in human potential.